So to go ahead and get started, I'm very excited to introduce our authors this evening, Eman Quotah and Donna Hemmins, for the program Exploring Identity, Place, and Belonging. Eman Quotah is the author of the novel Bride of the Sea. She grew up in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and Cleveland Heights, Ohio. Her writing has appeared in The Washington Post, USA Today, The Toast, The Establishment Book Riot, Literary Hub, Electric Literature, and other publications. She lives with her family near Washington, D.C. Jamaican-born Donna Hemmins is the author of the novel River Woman, winner of the 2003-2004 Towson University Prize for Literature. Tea by the Sea, for which she won the Lignum Vitae Una Marson Award for Adult Literature, is her second novel. She received her undergraduate degree from Fordham University and an MFA from American University. She lives in Maryland and is also the owner of the DC Writers' Room, a co-working studio for writers based in Washington, DC. So thank you so much, Donna and Eman, for being here with us this evening, and I will let them take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for welcoming us, Bexley Library. And I'm really excited to talk to you, Donna, because I read your book when it was featured on Leslie Petrick's Q&A series, TBR. And I think at the time, I had just sold my book to Tin House, and I was really excited by how similar in some ways your book sounded to mine. They both have similar plots, and they both deal with like international settings, the US and another country. And so there was so much in common, and then I read it and I really loved it so much. So I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, to the entire Bexley crew. And I was, when I read your book, Eman, I was wondering, okay, well, we are writing pretty much the same story, just in a different setting. There are a lot of cultural nuances that, certainly your book has that mine will just never have. And that's the beauty, I think, of writing, that we're all, pulling from our cultures, and you can tell, there's some similarities to the stories, but everything about our cultures, just simply makes it unique. So I was really excited about this conversation and about reading your book as well.
Yeah. So what I was rereading some of the pages recently, and I was really struck by how when you start Tea by the Sea, you are immediately thrust into Jamaica. You're both thrust into Lenworth's situation and like sort of what he's doing. And then, but you're also like, seeing the sights and sounds and smells of Jamaica at the same time. How important was it to you to kind of start it that way with such an immersive description of the Jamaican countryside?
Well, the funny thing is that's not where the story originally started at all. And I think, you probably have a similar story. But when I started writing it, I started with a section that takes place in the third part of the book, actually, where the young mother is getting her children ready for school. And I think, my goal at that point was to write a story that took place over a 24-hour period, where, you would have been, or the readers would have been falling back in time to what had happened 17 years prior. And, in the revision process, I realized that just simply wasn't working because we were falling back a little bit too much. And, so once I started looking at, how to rewrite the story, how to tell the story, I knew that I had to begin it at that moment. And just simply begin the search, begin with Lenworth walking away with the child, and immediately with Plum beginning her search for her daughter. But, certainly the landscape, the country itself, and describing Jamaica is just always important to me, because I want to write stories about Jamaica, stories that feature Jamaicans, stories that, any Jamaican can pick up any of my books and will say, this feels so familiar to me. And that's just always important to me.
I often talk about your book when I'm talking about like the timeline of my novel and plotting my novel, because we have such similar plots, but they start in different places. And when I first started writing this book, because it took me several tries to write the book, I started with the moment of the father who is left behind. In my book, it's the mother who steals the child, and she's a bit older. But I started with the moment of them reuniting, and I was going to kind of go forward from there. And over the years, I decided to start earlier in the story and before the abduction, and then go past the reunion as well. And so it's really interesting to me how you can take sort of a very similar story, but it's an important decision for the author to decide which part of the timeline you're going to start on, end on, where are you going to go back to. And it is kind of, it's tricky because I feel like you don't know until you've written a lot of it, sort of where your energy really should be.
Right. Yeah. And I think, I'm curious to hear what your goal was. For me, when I started writing it, and I think I usually have a question that I personally want to answer when I start writing something. And for me, the question for this particular book was, how far would a mother go to find her child? Mm-hmm. And I think, so when I look at the story and I look at how it's structured, that's the question that I'm answering. So I'm curious to find out, is that the way you think of your book? Is that the way you think of writing? Is that what were you searching for something similar as you were making that decision on how to tell the story?
Yeah, I love that idea of starting with a question. I think I do, but I don't always think of that as the central driver of the writing. But certainly with this book, for me, the question was, what is the effect when a child is abducted? This story was inspired by the fact that something like this happened to a friend of my father's, whose daughter was abducted by her mother, and he was in Saudi. They were in the United States, and he didn't see her for many years. And then I learned about the father and daughter being reunited when I was a young adult in my 20s. And I started thinking about, like, what would that be like to be reunited with a parent after so long? So that, I think that was one of the central questions for me at first. And then it sort of became, there were sort of questions that mushroomed out of that. So why would a mother do that? What would it be like for the father? And so I experimented with using a lot of different perspectives because I wanted to see kind of how this action of the mom affected different people in their lives, in the family and friends. So that was part of my motivation and inspiration for it. I was really struck by Lenworth's reasoning for what he did. And did that come to you? Like, did you know that all along that was going to be why he did it? Or did it take you a while to get to that?
It took me a while to get to it. And, one of the things that I wanted to tell Plum's story. I wanted it to be Plum's story, but I knew that I couldn't tell her story and her story only. I knew I had to tell his piece as well. So it took me some time to figure out exactly why he would do it and how he would go about doing it and how I would get them from Brooklyn to Jamaica and back from Jamaica to Brooklyn, because those two places were very important to me personally and also to the story. Yeah. But yeah, it took some time to figure out and to make it work. But I think it certainly was important for me to write a story about a father who was not necessarily your typical the horrible father. I wanted him to be caring in some ways, or I should say in his way, because he thinks he's doing something good. And he's coming from that good place. And I thought, and it was important for me to tell a story about a father who was trying to do what he considered to be the right thing.
Yeah, it's really nuanced, and it's sort of like his reasoning is so, like, to anybody else, his reasoning is like, you're like, what? Why would you think that? And but it's so realistic that he really believes it, and he thinks he's doing the right thing, but he's not very good at doing the right thing. I think that's how I read him. He tries, but he's not really good at it. And that's sort of, I mean, he makes a lot of mistakes, but you don't, I mean, I got really angry with him. I don't know that I ever like hated him for what he did, but I was like, why would you do that? Like, so, but I think the fact that it was so clear from the beginning why he was doing it, and the fact that it was, you know that this is going to mess up Plum and mess up her life, and not be really good for Opal either. And so sort of, I think there's this like kind of, I guess it's narrative irony, there's so much that that Lenworth doesn't. And that makes for a really interesting reading experience for me.
Yeah, it's always such a balance, to try to figure out exactly what to say and how to make it work. But yeah, it was important for him to think he was doing the right thing. And I didn't, I just, I've heard from so many people who just absolutely outright hate Lenworth, and there is just no way that he can redeem himself. But I mean, personally, I wanted a balance. I wanted him to have, to be both good and to be, to make poor decisions and to make a mess of things, but to be coming from that good place. And yeah, so it's hard. I think we all do as human beings. We all, do something like this. Hopefully not as bad as what Lenworth has done.
Right. I mean, I find that Saida is the character in my book who abducts her child, and reader reactions to her are kind of across the board. It's split. Whereas reader reactions to other characters are not as split. Many people have told me that they really love Munir or they really love Hannah, but Saida, it's like and I think that makes sense because she is the controversial character in the book. And it took me a while though to figure out how to respond to people's really strong reactions to her, because I have a certain way of thinking about her, but I don't want to, I want readers to be able to have their own reactions to the character. Are you finding similar reactions to characters in your book where, like, is Lenworth the most controversial, or do you have other characters who are too?
I think Lenworth is just hated. He's just outright hated. I think I may have found or heard from one person who said she understood Lenworth, and I think everybody else is just, there's just no redemption for him. I think that's mostly it. I think most people feel and understand Plum's situation, and certainly also Opal's situation, and Opal is the child in this story. But yeah, I think there's just nothing Lenworth could ever do to make himself better. But one of the things I'm curious about is you're talking about who tells the story, and you mentioned earlier that you wanted to have multiple points of view. So I'm curious about the daughters section and how you decided to tell her story, because she comes in much later on, and I think there's a section in which she's writing to her mother also to tell her how she felt. So I'm curious about that decision and the process of getting there. Did it work seamlessly? Was it always a part of the story, or was that something that you added later on?
No, I think that those sections were relatively early because I needed to see sort of, she's describing in her own words what happened when the day that her mother abducted her. And I needed to sort of see that for myself. I needed to know what happened. And so I wrote that, and it just kind of automatically came from her first person point of view. It was all of those sections were they're sort of interspersed through a part of the book. They were actually one really long chapter at first. And some feedback that I got was that it was just too intense to have it all together. And so I found that splitting those up kind of, it actually it helped the narrative kind of move along, because then you want to go back and kind of hear more about that. And then later parts about Hennadi, there are later sections from her point of view that aren't first person. And I felt like it was important to differentiate between that moment that, it's more than just the day, but it's the early period of when they're on the run, to differentiate between that and then her, the sections where she's reunited with her father. I just needed to tell them in a different way. And I don't know that I was thinking that, but that's sort of how it happened.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about it, and I like the way you made it work. Because it's one of the things that when I initially started writing, I wanted to have both parents and Opal's point of view, and I just couldn't get it to work. So I'm happy to see that you were able to make yours work in your story, but it just didn't quite work. And I think ultimately I decided it was the parent's story and not the child's story.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think when you get to the end of the book, you almost feel like Opal's story is just about to begin, beyond the page. And I like that. I like stories that go on beyond the page. Like you do this really, I thought, brave and risky thing of ending it at a moment of high drama. And I don't want to spoil it for anybody. I'm not going to say what it was, but I thought, oh, that this tells us that more is going to happen. Things aren't going to be tied up neatly, and it allows the reader to continue to imagine the story, that there are different ways this story could have ended. So tell me about the decision to end it the way that you did. Were you always going to end it that way, or
Yeah, I think two things. One, I don't like happy endings. I shouldn't say that, not in general in life, but in books. I don't like anything that's tied up too neatly.
Right.
I like to have an end where, I don't want to say there's a question, but in some ways, yes, there is a question. There is some reason, something for the reader to think about.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, it's very clear what happens next. And I hope that readers are in the same place that I am in terms of what happens next. So that's one but I think when I'm writing, or when I set out to write a book, I don't have a plot. I don't have a full sense of where the book is going. But somewhere in the process, I tend to write something that I think would be the last line. And so I had the very last line of the book written for a very long time. So I knew where I was heading towards.
Oh, wow.
So I think that's just how it had to end, pretty much. That is, I think it helps me to get through the story, just simply knowing what I'm heading towards, as opposed to necessarily, there's some people who just have everything plotted out, and I just have never been able to get there. How about you? How do you normally get to your ends?
Get to the ending?
Just about it too, because I hear that question over and over, just how I end books.
Yeah, I think that I often write past the ending. Mm-hmm. And what happened with this book is that I had, a section at the end, that my editor at Tin House said, let's just cut this. I don't think this is where it ends. Mm-hmm. And then I had to figure out, how it ended, where we got to. I had to put an ending there. And it was a really wise editing note, and relatively easy, because you just cut like 15, 20 pages by, you're gone. And it was hard because I had worked on those pages a lot, and I thought that's where it ended. That's sort of where I wanted it to end, I thought. But when she suggested a different ending, it made sense, and it made the ending, it kind of led to a decision at the end that changes how people see the book, changes where the characters end up. And so, it was a really smart edit. And sometimes when people tell you to cut stuff, you're like, I don't want to do that. But I had been through so many edits with this book already, and so many changes. And I really trusted her guidance, and I really liked where we ended up with it. And I think it's a better book for ending it where it does. But I love that you write the last line and you kind of know where you're going. That's really cool. I want to ask you about some of the themes of the book. One of the lines that really resonated a lot with me was when Plum is thinking about her parents, and she said her parents loved the island but refused to live on it. And I thought that was so, I can kind of understand that feeling a little bit. And it's such such a thing that applies to not all immigrants, obviously, but so many immigrants. So can you talk about that a little bit? And also just about there's so many missing people in the book. It's not just Opal, right? That there are people missing from the home. There are people so many people who have left and not come back. And I'm interested to hear you talk about that aspect of the book.
Right. Yeah. Well, starting with the first question, I think it's one of those things when you live, in a country like Jamaica, where, or you leave Jamaica, and there's so many things that you then become accustomed to. You can go to the bank and actually get business done in a very short period of time, and you don't have to deal with the bureaucracy. You can, there are just some little things that you just simply get used to. And I think that is a lot of what Plum was referring to, with her parents, that it's easy to look back and say, I love being here. I love the foods. I love, some of the things that you're able to do. But once you have to get in and start doing any kind of business, it just feels like there is so much, pressing in on you and preventing you from getting it done. And so I think that there are so many people, so many Jamaicans I know who have heard that from, who, just shake their head and say, no, I can't deal. And it's just easier to just come and stay for a little bit and just move on. And I think depending on where you're from, I think that's just, some of what you're accustomed to in your home country. And wait, what was the second part?
The second question was about the sort of missing people.
Yeah, I think, when I started writing the book, and I knew that I had to set a portion of it in Jamaica, I was trying to figure out exactly what would happen.
Okay, well, while we hope that Donna's internet will be back swiftly, Eman, is it okay if I go ahead and throw you a question from the audience that we had for you while we hope that Donna will join us quickly?
Yeah. Can you
Okay.
send her a note so she
Yes, absolutely.
knows?
Yeah, Whitney's gonna send her a note on the other side.
All right.
Yeah,
Oh no.
alrighty. So yeah, my colleague Whitney is going to email Donna, so hopefully she will be back with us shortly. And in the meantime, Iman, or we had a question for you from the audience. Let me see if I can find it here really quick. Okay, it was about the perspectives. In the book, you and Donna talked about this a little bit, but having the perspectives from both of the parents and then also Saida. And so the question is, Bride of the Sea tells the story from multiple perspectives, but it seems we hear far less from Saida than the other characters. Was this intentional? And what should readers take away from that?
Yeah, it was intentional. And actually her perspective wasn't in the book at first.
Interesting.
But yeah, in early drafts. But in order to sort of get at the nuances of what had happened, I added her perspective. So I think they're meant to be glimpses, but I think for me, part of it is I don't think that the other two perspective characters, Hanadi and her father Munir, really ever are able to fully understand why Saida does what she does, and or to forgive her. And so I think giving her less time was kind of a way of showing that.
Yeah, certainly as a reader, you're kind of, I don't know, as I was reading it, I was thinking, okay, some of Hanadi's perspective, I almost thought I would almost start reading it like, oh, okay, because I'm reading from Munir's perspective and he's the father, the next perspective will be the mother. And then it turned out it was Hanadi. And so it was actually, this third perspective. And I was like, oh, I'm never actually getting the motive or like the motivation behind Saida, like why she did what she did. And so that actually leads to another question that we had. And of course, when Donna comes back, I would love to hear her perspective on this as well. But a book that we've talked a lot about at the library in relation to your book was Little Fires Everywhere. It was by Celeste Ng. It was so popular. There's a Hulu series now. Celeste Ng is also from Cleveland Heights, or no, I'm sorry. Yeah, Cleveland
Shaker
Heights.
or Cleveland,
Shaker.
yeah.
She's from Shaker Heights, which is very close to Cleveland Heights.
Yes.
And so it was like, whoa, these, Ohio is, has these amazing authors, which is great. But it even took place in the 90s, and it has a very similar story. Well, it's not as similar as Tea by the Sea, but it includes sort of these ideas of sort of mother knows best. And it actually includes two characters who, again, like no spoilers, but there are some like parental abduction sort of angles in the book. And so what
I'm going to need to read it now. I didn't.
Oh yeah.
I haven't read it. Okay.
It's a delight. It's a delight for sure. I mean, the themes aren't delightful, but
right.
The book is a delight to read.
It's a good
exactly.
Book.
Yeah. Yes, and it has some of those Cleveland references, like your book, which I loved because I'm from Northeast Ohio. But the question is, so it has these themes of, a mother's love and a mother knowing best. And so when something that struck me as I started reading your book, I went into it with the assumption that, the mother is obviously going to be the protagonist of this book. It's written by a woman, a mother, that'll obviously she'll be the protagonist. But it's very murky. And you had mentioned that people have this like really diverse reaction to Saida.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so can you talk about that a little bit? Like how you, I don't know, I don't want to call her a villain, but like, is she the protagonist? Talk about that a little bit. And then including Tea by the Sea, I think Plum is clearly the protagonist. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, she was going to be the villain from the start because she abducts her daughter, and
that's a villainous act.
But I also wanted to try to understand kind of the way that Donna was talking about, wanting to understand why Leavenworth had done what he did. So to me, I think it was a little bit of context that I think might help people to understand Saida's actions a little bit, is that unlike other countries of the Middle East, Saudis don't have a history of immigrating to the United States, and Saudis tend to come for a short period of time. They come to study or they come to work, and then they go back. So the expectation of immigration and staying wouldn't be there, or the option of that wouldn't seem like an option. And the expectation would be for her to go back as a divorced mother. Obviously, not every divorced mother takes the kind of extreme action that she does, but I think that context helps to understand part of why she would fear for her daughter being taken away from her. So I think that she takes this cultural expectation of daughters going to their fathers at a certain age and becomes extremely paranoid about it. And then does this action that, can't really be explained.
Yeah.
I hope Donna is able to come back soon.
I know. I know. And we're very much checking that, making sure that she's not like in the waiting room. Don't see her. Oh man. Okay. We go ahead.
I was gonna say we could ask some more questions from the audience.
Yep. Yeah. So we have a question here, Eman, about, and again, this is a great one for Donna as well. I don't know. Maybe she'll call in. She'll do the that old school.
I hope she can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We reached out, but if her internet's out, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're both in the DC area, right?
Yeah. And I wanted to ask her about the writer's room because I've never been there, but it sounds cool.
It sounds extremely cool. The whole group of us here tonight will have to do a Google and we can, until she gets back. But so one of the audience members asked, I've heard that authors who write from different perspectives are sometimes given the advice to read the book through reading only one perspective. Do you write that way? And if so, how does that teach you anything new about the characters as you continue to write and to edit?
Oh, so as though the book was only told from one point of view?
Mm-hmm.
I have never gotten that advice. That's interesting. I think, it's funny because I was in a writing class once where there were loads of people who were writing from multiple perspectives. And, there's a lot of books that do that, not all books, but I sort of examined sort of why I wanted to tell a story from multiple perspectives. And the book I'm writing now, I'm also telling from multiple perspectives. And I think that for me, part of it is, that whole thing about, the danger of a single story and kind of trying to get at more than one truth. But I also think that for me, one of my storytelling influences is having grown up hearing a lot of different stories from the Quran, and it's all, it's different perspectives, different stories of different people, a kind of a collage. And so, that might be part of it too. I'm not sure. But I really like how telling different perspectives can help you get at things in a different way. And it also might be that, using an omniscient perspective isn't really something that writers do as much anymore. And instead, we're trying to piece together different perspectives and give them maybe not equal time, but, go go from inside of them rather from above them. So yeah, I feel that even, I wrote a bunch of perspectives that didn't make it into the book. And I think that doing that, and it wasn't like an exercise, I was actually thinking I'm going to have like different perspectives.
Can you tell us whose were included?
So the grandmother, the grandfather, the father's, Munir's second wife, they all had chapters. And then, but I found that when I decided to whittle it down to just 3 perspectives, it really helped to have written from those other perspectives, because I felt like I was able to give like layers to the narrative that wouldn't have been there otherwise, so that I kind of knew the story from different perspectives within each section. And that was really helpful, is like kind of, peeling back the layers of an onion or something like that.
It did feel very, as you're talking about that, like those characters, there were many characters in the book, even though it was this like very specific story that it felt like was being told. But it did feel very fully fleshed out, like a very fully realized family, like Munir's family, like the scene where he takes his mother to the wedding, to the family wedding, and just a lot of that world building was really vivid, like the way you were describing, like the candied almonds that the younger women were eating, and when she went and visited them. And so if that had been part of the mother's perspective, I can definitely see how that was very.
It was, you got it.
Yeah, it was very helpful in building that. And it also, because you said that you were inspired by something like a story, like something that had happened to a friend of your father's, and how it affected everyone. And so it would make sense that you would want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I saw it as I had observed as an outsider, and then wanting to kind of get all these different perspectives on things. I like to talk about the epigraph of the book, which is from Surah Yusuf, and Surah Yusuf, it's a chapter of the Quran that is referred to a couple of times in the book. And this is a story of Joseph, who is abducted by his siblings and left in a well. And it's one of my favorite stories from the Quran. It was one of my favorites growing up. And there's a quote at the beginning of the book from Surah Yusuf, where Yusuf tells his father that, he had a dream. Well, first it says, it's God basically saying, we tell you in the Quran, we tell you the best of stories. And then it's Yusuf telling his father that he had his dream, and his father saying, don't tell the story of your dream to your brothers or to your siblings. So it's like, which stories get to be told, which stories don't get to be told, secrets and lies within families. And those were things that I wanted to touch on from the beginning. I think that Surah Yusuf was sort of a touchstone for me through all the different versions of the book and revisions and stuff. That kind of, I didn't see it as like a retelling, but really inspired by this Quranic and biblical tale.
Yes, it's the same, or like the same person is Joseph from the Technicolor, like not the Technicolor Dreamcoat, which is a musical movie.
Joseph from the Bible. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's that with the 12 brothers. Okay. So, there's a comment in the chat. The person says that it's not so much a question, but more of a comment. I was empathetic to Saida. I could understand her paranoia about her daughter being taken away from her, but I also felt sad that her extreme reaction led her to a life of more paranoia, as she was never settled anywhere she went. I was a bit frustrated that her daughter, I'm so sorry to interrupt. It looks like Donna's back.
Yay,
so I will go ahead
back.
Did you let her in?
Yeah, I let her in.
Okay, great. Let's see. Yay,
Donna, you're back.
Huzzah.
We missed you.
This is what happens when you speak about Jamaica. Actually, and so the power went out, and then the internet just would not come back on.
Oh no.
anything else at all about bureaucracy or anything like that?
Well, I want to hear about Sunday Contact, the radio show. Was this based on a real radio show?
Yeah, there's actually a radio show here called Sunday Contact, and what happened actually when I started writing, when I got to the point where I knew I wanted to set a story in the church, and I couldn't figure out exactly why this woman would be in the church, and I couldn't figure out why she'd be searching for, who she would be looking for and what was going on. And I just happened to be here in Jamaica, and I heard a woman on the radio who called in because she was looking for her son. And it turns out that her child, the child's father had taken the boy, and she didn't know where they were, whether they were still here in Jamaica, whether they had migrated. And one of the things that, so people will call into the show, to that program, to find various, family members, friends, whatever. And so when I heard this woman talking about her son and wanting to find her child, I said, this is my story. This is why she's in that church, and she will not leave that church until she finds her child.
Oh.
Oh no.
Oh no.
We will have to send her a hotspot in the mail.
Oh no.
Oh, poor Donna. So I guess we'll jump right back over to the comment.
No. Well, I was
Please,
gonna responding to that comment.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that I did research for the book about family abduction, and one of the things that I learned was that people might have the idea that as long as a child is with their parent, even though they've been abducted, that they're fine, but that's not actually true. There's a lot of trauma that is associated with family abduction. And I read the first person stories of adults who had been abducted as children. And there was a lot of pain associated with it. Some people didn't know that they had been abducted until they were older, until they were adults. They're sort of piecing back together what happened in their childhoods and what it meant. And they're being reunited with a parent that they were told was dead, or they thought had abandoned them. So I figured that there would be a lot of pain and, difficulty forgiving associated with that. And that's something that I think, that I really like people to come away with is the difficulty of that sort of situation.
Yeah, absolutely. You had mentioned earlier on that it took you, I think you said a few tries to write the book.
Yeah.
Can you talk at all about, it sounds like that would be really tough research. And this is obviously a very tough, it's tough to read, certainly. There are parts of it where it's, Hannah's, you had mentioned you split up her letters because it's too much to read all in one piece.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk at all about what the earlier iterations of the book looked like, and maybe how much, have you been working on it for years, or sort of that process?
Yeah, I started it, I think soon after I learned that the real life dad and daughter had been reunited. And but I used it as a starting point. It's not meant to be that family or based on that family. All the details are made up. And but at first I started it with them reuniting, and I wrote, a number of pages, and then I sort of was having trouble getting further with it. So I set it aside. I wrote another manuscript and finished that manuscript. And then I went back to this one and started again. And I ended up just, putting away all of the pages that I had written before and starting from scratch.
Wow.
Pretty much. So, and I think that's not an uncommon story for writers, to like, I read sort of how, Min Jin Lee wrote Pachinko. I think she had sort of some of the same, a similar story where she started writing it and then she realized that there was just so much that she needed to learn. Welcome back again.
Yeah, sorry, my apologies. Power surges, so I don't know why. Of all days, it had to be today.
It had to be today. Well, we were just talking about my journey writing my book, and it took a couple iterations and many years. Can you talk about your journey writing Tea by the Sea? Was it a straight shot or a sort of up and down journey?
It was mostly straight, but very different because my first book came out in 2002. So I had a 17-year gap between books, and I had written 2 other books in between, which, I had to revise and set aside, and then I started writing Tea by the Sea. And so strangely enough, once I started writing that book, I think I had a really good sense of what story I wanted to tell and how to go about doing it. So the issues that I had with book 2 and book 3, I just didn't have with Tea by the Sea. Yeah. But certainly after I had, I'd written a full draft and I thought it was done, I had to go back to the drawing board and rewrite to go from telling a book in 24 hours to writing a story set over 17 years. So yeah, that was really the most dramatic piece of telling the story or getting it done.
Yeah. My books have tended to be over years or decades, and I'm the idea of those really contained books that are in 24 hours or a week or something, it's really cool, but it's really hard to do, I think.
Yeah, it's very hard to do. And I've read, there's at least one book, and I can't remember the writer now, but it's the guy from Barbados who wrote one, which I thought was very well done. And it took place over a significant period of time, but it was 24 hours. A woman had gone to the police station to tell a story about how somebody died. And she went through the entire history, pretty much the entire history of Barbados, to come back to explaining, why this man was killed. And I love the idea, love the technique. I just, maybe with another book, I'll be able to do it. I don't think I'll stop trying.
Yeah.
But,
that's a good writing goal. Yeah.
So I hope I didn't miss your talking about, well, I guess I missed it, talking about, how you decided to structure yours over, she is by 18 by the time she meets her father, or somewhere around there in college. How did you decide on that window of time?
I think that I wanted her to meet him when she was a young adult, because I feel like it's already such a pivotal moment. And then I also wanted it to be during the Gulf War, because I thought having her go to Saudi during that time would be really dramatic. And, I was a senior in high school that year, so it was easy for me to kind of paint a picture of what it was like to be there at that time. And I think that allowed me to bring in some of the sort of issues, the sort of socio-political issues that are kind of in the second half of the book would kind of stem from that. So yeah, I think that, but then I think that having her kind of get older and it was sort of like that idea that when something happens in your life that like changes everything, well, then you keep living your life. So then what happens after that, And so I kind of wanted to show that too. But jumping around to different kind of pivotal moments in time.
And I'm going to go ahead, since we have a few more minutes here, I'm going to jump in to both of you. We've had two questions from the audience that are about the setting. The first question was kind of, would the books be any different if they were set in a different geographical area, or how does that impact the telling of the story? And the second one was, could you talk a bit about the themes of identity and belonging in your books? In Bride by the Sea, I enjoyed the unexpected ways that different characters connect to the two countries and the different places where they live. So there's some questions in the audience about the setting and geography and connection to that.
You want to go ahead, Donna?
Sure, I'll take the setting. I think I can't imagine what the book would be if it were set somewhere else, because I think the setting plays a significant role. One, the school that the young girl comes to in Jamaica is, I think, has a distinctive Jamaican flavor. The family dynamic, I think, is distinctively Jamaican as well. And I think just looking at both our stories side by side, while there is the heart of the story is, there's a search for the missing child, but there is so much else around it. The culture, the landscape, the places where the stories take place really make a big difference. I think that Brooklyn, the way the portion of the story that takes place in New York is set in Brooklyn, that makes a big difference. I think it would have been a very different story if it had been set in Ohio, because the landscape is certainly different. The feeling that she gets when both Plum and Opal get about being in Brooklyn, I think would just simply be something different if it had been set in Ohio. So I think for every story, the setting matters. Certainly here in Jamaica, I think, the way somebody described it to me is that there's a feeling of freedom and openness when she's in Jamaica, when Plum is in Jamaica, whereas when she gets to Brooklyn, it's a different kind of feeling, not necessarily depressive, and not necessarily dark, but it's just a different feeling, the way in which I describe the buildings, the way in which I describe the landscape in Jamaica. And I think that plays a significant part in the story and how the story is told. And I imagine you would say the same.
Yeah. And I think the setting really mattered, and the sort of the fact that Hannadi goes to Jeddah, and it's just such a different place than what she's used to, but it's a place that her mother is connected to but has never talked about, and so that she's sort of excavating a past that she didn't even know she had, and I think also because it's interesting, because there are a lot of people for whom Saudi Arabia is this kind of like black box. But then there are people who have lived there or have relatives who live there, and the reaction, or live somewhere similar, and the reaction that I get to the setting is different from people with different experiences. But having that setting was really important to me. And I think in terms of, identity and belonging, I'm not sure how to answer that question, because I think I'm a little bit at loss for words about it, because I think it's something that I know is part of the book, but that to me is really just intrinsic. And I don't think I really thought about how am I representing identity here. I think in a lot of ways, identity is really connected to place and family. And when Hannadi goes to Saudi Arabia, and the way her family kind of embraces her, it gives her something that she didn't even know she was looking for. And maybe that's a kind of identity. I'm not sure.
Well, I'll try to tackle that one.
Okay.
For me, I think those are two things that I'm always writing about, regardless of what I write. And in the case of Tea by the Sea, for Plum and for Opal, it's a sense of it's really the question for them is, where is home?
Mm-hmm.
Opal left Jamaica when she was 8 because her father took her away, and I took her away and took her to Brooklyn. But she doesn't feel at home in Brooklyn, and something is missing her mother is missing, and that's that other big thing that makes for her that helps to define her sense of home and sense of belonging. And I think it's the same for Plum, because she was sent back to Jamaica when she was a teenager. Her parents sent her here to finish school. She had only known Brooklyn. She had grown up in Brooklyn, and that to her was home. So when she loses that connection, she loses the connection to her parents, she loses the connection to Brooklyn, she loses the connection to home. But yet she's tied to Jamaica because that's where she had her child, and that's where her child goes missing. So there is, for her, a conflict in where does she belong? Is it the place that her parents call home, and which I should not be talking about just in case the power goes out again? But is it that place, or is it Brooklyn? And I think that's one of the things that she struggles with when she comes back to Brooklyn, when she's looking for her child, because she doesn't know, and she is not able to really center herself and settle in either in Jamaica or in Brooklyn, because she's going back and forth. So I think it's just, like in Tea by the Seas, there is just always that question of where do you belong and who do you belong to? Is the father, the one who has raised the child, the person who Opal belongs to? Or is it her mother, this person she doesn't know at all? And I think it's, certainly with Bride of the Sea, it's similar. Right. The mother has raised the child for such a long time, has taken her away. Is this who she belongs to? Is this where her heart is? Or is it with the father and with the culture that she just didn't have a chance to grow up in and, fully embrace?
Yeah, I think something that I think is interesting that both our books do is, people have called my book an immigration story, but I prefer to call it like a migration or a movement story, because there's movement in both directions in both books. And that's often the way it is in life. It's not as simple a story as we all go to one place and we stay there.
Yeah. It's never that simple.
No.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. Before we wrap up, I would love it if are either of you able to talk about what you're working on now or what's coming up next. And I want to make sure that Donna, you get a chance to talk about the DC Writers Room. We were all curious about that when your internet went out. So yeah, if you all can tell us what you're working on or what's coming up and anything you'd like to plug.
Okay, sure. The book I'm working on now, or which is finished and which hopefully will find a home soon, is called Tree of 1,000 Feet, and it's set between Jamaica and Cuba in the 1930s. And the DC Writers Room is the place where I run away from home to write, because there are things that are distracting at home. But yeah, it's a co-working studio where writers can come in and just simply have a place where there's no distractions at all and they can get work done.
That sounds awesome. I'm working on an Arab American Hollywood novel, and I'm also working on a middle grade gin story, kind of at the same time. I can't decide which one I want to just focus on yet. So thanks so much for having us.
Those all sound amazing. Whitney and I were both like, oh, those sound so great.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you both so much for joining us. I want to drop into the chat. This was a partnership event with Gramercy Books across the street, independent bookstore. So I think everyone is dying to know what happens if you haven't read Tea by the Sea, what the drama is.
Go buy it.
I put the link in the chat. Please support our authors, and thank you both so much for being here this evening. Thank you for sharing your time, and thank you all in the audience for supporting us and for tuning in this evening. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Donna.
Bye. Have a great evening.